Hello there, welcome to my review of the 1987 film The Monster Squad, starring Andre Gower as Sean, Robbie Keeger as Patrick, Duncan Regier as Dracula, Tom Noonan as Frankenstein's monster, Brent Challam as Horace, and Ryan Lambert as Rudy, with Ashley Bank as Phoebe. The film is directed by Fred Decker and written by Decker and Shane Black. So, to the spoiler-free review. The basic premise of this movie is that Dracula assembles a team of classic monsters to help him take over the world, and a group of young kids try to stop them. A very basic premise, but brilliantly executed thanks to a really sharp and funny script from Black and Decker, the writers, not the Power Tool Company. The monsters all look great, which is what you'd expect with creature effects by Stan Winston. A few of the visual effects look a little ropey, but the camera doesn't linger on them enough for it to be distracting. And the prosthetic makeup is so good, it really makes up for any flaws in the visual effects. I think it helps that they had to make the monsters look distinct from the Universal horror films so they wouldn't infringe on copyright, but still look recognisable. The cast are all really good. The kids do a great job at selling the comedy and the horror. Regier's Dracula is pure evil. Noonan is superb as Frankenstein's monster. He is a really underrated actor and his performance really comes through the makeup. The script is brilliant. It moves at a fast pace, which it has to with its 85-ish minute running time, but still manages to fill out the characters of the majority of the cast. It's very funny, with some very quotable lines, and the humour never feels misplaced. It's just a very enjoyable watch, and it's a real shame that not many people saw it on its initial release. It has found a wider audience over the years, but it deserves to be more well known as it's a real gem. This film is unquestionably nothing but the best. In fact, it's a Hall of Fame film for me. On to the spoiler-filled review. So if you haven't seen the film, watch it, fall in love, and come back for the rest of this review. The film opens with a view of a graveyard, straight from a Hammer horror film. And with the movie being filmed largely on the Universal Studios backlot, the town square being the same town square as in Back to the Future, the whole film has that vintage movie feel. The film is somewhat a love letter to those classic horror films, and might be partly responsible for it not reaching a wider audience, as it came out in a time that was all about the new, rather than the nostalgia fest of today. There are many theories amongst fans as to why such a good film failed, and they're all valid. Too scary for kids, too many kids in the cast for adults, bad marketing, opening against The Lost Boys which skewed to an older audience, a cast of unknowns, an odd concept for the time, or a combination of all these things. Either way, it was a flop, despite its quality. My personal theory is the fact that it harkened back to character types of the 30s and 40s, with no attempt to update those characters, just didn't gel with the late 80s audience in the same way that Lost Boys did. Monster Squad's Dracula is the full Lugosi Widow's Peak suit and cape version, as opposed to the heavy metal haircuts and clothing and disaffected youth vampires of the Lost Boys. So the film starts with a short prologue of Abraham Van Helsing's failed attempt to end Dracula for good. He completely messes it up. We then fast forward to the present day, just under exactly 100 years later. We meet our main protagonists, Sean and Patrick, who are in trouble with a teacher for a lack of discipline and drawing monster pictures in class.
Monsters are not real.
We don't know that, sir.
This introduces a theme of the film, that if you have a special interest that isn't particularly academic, stick with it, even if it's considered immature or useless to society, because ultimately your passion could be invaluable. I'm sure this is a sentiment that is reflected by the filmmakers, who I'm sure were told to give up on these silly monster movies and pay more attention in class when they were at school, and who turned that passion into a profession. The next character we meet is the boy's friend, known affectionately as Fat Kid. he's being bullied by two bigger kids until he's rescued, in one of cinema's greatest character introductions, by Rudy. Rudy is introduced pulling a skid on his BMX, striking a match on his shoe to light his cigarette, despite being no more than 14 or 15, and wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses. It couldn't be more 80s. He saves Fat Kid from the bullies because he's a nice guy, so he's invited to join their monster club as long as he passes a monster test. We also meet Phoebe, Sean's 5-year-old sister, and neighbourhood kid Eugene, who is somewhere between Sean and Phoebe's age, plus Eugene's dog Petey. Eugene is one of the least filled out characters, but has some good one-liners. His dad is played by the same actor who gives John McClane advice about taking his shoes off at the start of Die Hard. The kids stop outside the rundown house of Scary German Guy, who the kids are terrified of. I think this is a staple of every small town. A rundown house with all sorts of local legends about the person that owns it. We also find out that Sean's dad is a cop and that his parents' marriage is in trouble. All of these introductions are quick and straightforward, but instantly tells us who these characters are. At the same time, we also get introduced to the villains, Dracula, Gilman, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and Frankenstein's monster. Gilman having the least to do here. The Mummy escaping from a museum means Sean's dad has to miss a marriage counselling session, and at the same time that's happening, a crazy guy at the police station is claiming to be a werewolf, and he's shot dead when he takes a gun off one of the cops. Lock me up! Only to be resurrected as the Wolfman in the ambulance taking him to the morgue, setting up the fact that the guy is cursed with his lycanthropy. Sean's mother has found Van Helsing's book, not realising what it is, at a house clearance, just before Dracula sets himself up in the same house, but Sean can't read it because he doesn't speak German. This introduces Scary German Guy, who is of course not scary at all, and he happily translates the book for them. There is an indestructible amulet that balances good and evil, but every 100 years it can either be broken or can open a portal to rid the world of monsters. This exchange is given added depth when we find out Scary German Guy is a Holocaust survivor who is familiar with human monsters. It's just a little scene, but adds an extra layer of depth to the film. Even if you don't believe in Dracula and the Wolfman, there really are real monsters in the world. Dracula sends Frankenstein's monster to get the book from the kids, but he encounters Phoebe on her own by a lake, echoing a similar scene from the original story. However, this ends with Phoebe befriending the monster. They let Frank join the squad, and we get a montage of them preparing for battle, including recruiting Patrick's sister as the virgin they need to recite the passage that opens the portal. The rest of the gang head to Dracula's lair to get the amulet, but Frank is trapped under falling rubble. They manage to get the amulet after Fat Kid famously kicks Wolfman in the nards. And they quickly head to the town square. This is where Rudy really earns his place in the squad by taking out the Mummy, the Brides of Dracula, and eventually the Wolfman, while Fat Kid gets his own hero moment while he reminds the bullies from earlier that his name is Horace. Turns out Patrick's sister isn't a virgin, so Eugene suggests Phoebe reads the passage with help from Scary German Guy. But they're interrupted by Dracula in a truly frightening moment, and Frank steps in to save her, as he has freed himself and she manages to open the portal. But it won't close until Frank is gone too, which leads to a really touching goodbye between him and Phoebe. There's a funny little sting at the end, and it's over far too soon. There's very little not to like about this film, other than its short running time. An extra 10 or 15 minutes would have helped some of the characterization of some of the minor characters, but other than that, there's not much else wrong. I would recommend you seek out this film. You can find it on DVD or Blu-ray. It was available on streaming on Amazon Prime, but certainly in the UK isn't anymore. But you can still pay for it on streaming. Seek it out and let me know what you think. Thank you. Goodbye.
Wolfman's got nards. Come on, come on!